Alright y'all, welcome back to the channel and to some more buckshot testing. And today, we've got a pretty interesting thought process here. I want to find out if you could actually hunt with a defensive load of buckshot. And more specifically, as far as that defensive load goes, some of these. The Winchester Defender Stop the Threat buckshot shells. These are a 12 gauge, 2 3/4 inch, 9 pellet double aught buck shell, moving about 1145. So these are a lower recoil buckshot shell and a little bit lower velocity buckshot shell. But in our initial test, they seem to pattern pretty decently. So I want to find out, well, what kind of hunting pattern would we have out of these if you wanted to hunt maybe hogs or coyotes or something like that with a lower recoil buckshot shell? So definitely a pretty interesting question here today, and one that I think we should be able to see some pretty interesting results from, that's for sure. So as for our setup today, I've brought back out the Remington 1187 here, and as for a choke, I left the stock full choke in the gun, which is typically what I like to run for most buckshot, but it's also what performed the best in our initial test, figuring out, well, what choke works the best with those Winchester Defender shells. And the full choke did the best, so that's what we're sticking with for today, because we're going to need the best pattern we can get down at 40 yards. So as for our test, we're going to run everything the same as usual. I have the big sheet of paper set up down at 40 yards. I also have our chronograph, so we'll be able to see our speed and how close it is to their box claim. So let's get you guys set up with a view of this target. We'll take our shot, we'll look at our chrono, and we'll go down and see how they actually performed. I don't know that this would be my first choice for a deer hunting load, but for something like hogs or coyotes, it might be a pretty good option. A little bit lower recoil and maybe a pretty decent pattern as well. But let's go over here and shoot it and see what kind of pattern we can actually get out of them. Okay, so that shell gave us 1,044 across the chronograph. The box is claiming 1145, so that's 1,001 under their claim. And if I'm remembering correctly, about 1050 or so was what we were getting previously when we tested it. So even though we're a little bit under their claim, it's not totally unusual for these shells, it would seem. But at only 1,044, you're not going to be carrying quite as much energy as you would a load of double aught buck moving, 1,200, 1,250, 1,300. Doesn't seem like much, but when you're working with shells that have pellets in them instead of just a big old slug, every little bit can make the difference sometimes when it comes to penetration. So a little bit lower than their claim on this, but nothing unusual. However, how did they actually perform downrange at 40 yards? Let's go check it out and see. Alright, so now we're down here at our 40-yard paper, and this is what we got. Now for a quick reference, the white dot was my point of aim. The paper is 36 inches wide by probably about 38 inches tall or so. And this is the spread we got. And it looks pretty good. We have all 9 pellets right there, with one that might have been a little bit of a flyer down there at the bottom. But the total spread gave us 16.5 inches. And that is from that bottom left pellet all the way over there to that top right pellet over in the corner there. So 16.5 inches at 40 yards. That is pretty much exactly what flight control buckshot gives us out of the same setup with the same full choke. So these seem to be right on par with what that flight control load gives us, and that federal flight control shell seems to be kind of the bar that we've set for buckshot performance. But let's throw a couple templates up real quick just to give us a little bit better of a reference point to see how it actually would have performed out in the field. We'll start with our 10-inch circle and see what it looks like here. Okay, so here's our 10-inch circle, and as we can see, we have 3 pellets kind of right on the outskirt edges of it. By the numbers, 3 to 4 pellets seems to be about average, but in this scenario, we do have to take into account that the majority of our pellets might have been just a touch to the right, but if this was the shot that counted in the field, that would have been what our 10-inch circle actually looked like there. But for those of you that would want to see best case scenario, I did scoot it over to the right a little bit, which gave us 5 in there. So that would have been best case scenario. However, if that was the shot that counted, we would have had 3 in there. But let's throw a deer template up and see what it would have looked like on an actual animal size target and if you would have gotten it or not. Alright, so here's our deer template, and for reference, we do have his front leg down there at the bottom, and his neck just starts on the right edge there. So if we line our point of aim up here, that would have been all 9 pellets on that deer. Now again, I don't think this would be my ideal load for deer hunting. I think that would kind of go towards the federal flight control. You have a little bit faster moving pellet, a little bit more energy, and probably a little bit better penetration. But for a reference point here today, it looks pretty good on this deer template. But for a little bit closer reference to what I might use these shells for, I do have the hog template as well. So let's throw that up real quick and take a look and see how it would have done. All right, so here's our hog template, and as we can see, we had all 9 pellets within that as well. So when it comes to hogs or coyotes or foxes that would be just a touch smaller than this hog template here, I think we absolutely have a good enough pattern right there to do the job on anything you would want to use it for out to 40 yards. That's for sure. Now, with that being said, I think we clearly have a good enough pattern to do the job, but I think it comes down to a little bit lower velocity, playing into what you might want to use these shells for, and another big factor is the price. With that box of shells being right at $20 to $22 range, you're looking at $2 a shell for that, and is that actually worth it to use for you anyway? I don't know. I guess I'll leave that up to you, whether or not you think it's worth it or not, because I think that's probably the biggest factor when it comes to using these defensive shells as hunting shells is price point. But if you like good patterns and you want a little bit lower recoil shell for that predator size game or hogs, it would absolutely be good enough, I'd say. Okay, and here's the wad out of that shell, and as you can see, it's not really anything too special looking. It honestly kind of looks like a target wad, but it does have a pretty good sizable shock piston area there, and the pedals do have the little ribs on the inside to strengthen them up a little bit. You can see one good dimple right down there in the bottom where one of those pellets sat, but overall, the wad looks pretty good. No rips, tears, anything I'd be concerned about, and clearly it did the job just fine for these shells, that's for sure. And this just goes to show that you might not need a special flight control wad to get a good buckshot pattern, because clearly this one did pretty good. So nothing weird or strange or anything here to take note of on this one, I'd say. All right, y'all. Well, what do you think about that pattern right there? It absolutely seems to perform good enough to get the job done for a hunting pattern, that's for sure. But like I mentioned a minute ago, I think it comes down to kind of 2 things. Number 1, the speed that they're going at. Is that enough to get you the kind of penetration or energy that you're looking for? And 2, the price point. Being $20-ish a box, is it worth it, or do you think it's worth it in your opinion to actually use these for a hunting shell? I definitely don't think they're a bad option when it comes to coyotes, fox, hogs, things like that. Clearly good enough performance, but the price point on the other hand, I'm not really a huge fan of. But let me know your thoughts about it in the comments. Number 1, is that about what you expected to see, or were you a little bit surprised as far as the performance goes? And number 2, do you think it's worth it to use these shells for hunting purposes with a little bit lower velocity and the price point anyway? Let me know all that down below, because I really want to see how you guys feel about it. But with that being said, I've got some more testing to film for you guys, so I'm going to get back to it. As always, we have the channel Instagram as well as the mailbox where you can send things. If you're interested in that information, it will be in the description as always. But I'm going to get back to it. So I'll see y'all in the next one.